Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining in. Here's HOPS Virtual Workshop number 20. Yes, we've made it all the way to 20 workshops. Who would have thought it? Thank you very much for tuning in. This is going to be part 3 of our series of workshops on track safety, which is part 20 of our general overall SMS workshops for 2021. Do remember to say hello in the comments. Let us know what organisation you are watching from, and we'll say hello to you. Hello and good evening to John Garvey, first in line this week. John Garvey. Also watching is James Negus. Andy Stokes is watching. Hello. Hello, Phil McIver from PNP. John Vincent Wrigley is also watching, a new viewer that I don't think we've seen before. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hello, Ruth from the Weardale Railway. Ruth is one of our most regular watchers, so thank you very much, Ruth, for tuning in as always. Hello to David Kiln from the Old Kiln Light Railway. Paul Wilson from many different railways throughout the country. Hello, Paul, thank you for tuning in. Hello, Aaron from the MC and Bolton Abbey Railway. Stuart Mulliner also from MC. Thank you very much. Wow, there's loads of you tonight. This is absolutely amazing. Mark Mates from the Somerset and Dorset Railway Heritage Trust at Midsummer Norton. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Hopefully you will enjoy this evening's workshop and get something useful out of it. If you've not joined in before, I'll go through the sort of ins and outs of it in a second. Important thing is that you take part in the comments, especially if something gets said that you disagree with. This is not a lecture for me just to bark instructions at you. This is a workshop where it works best if everybody takes part. So we'll just go through some of the normal housekeeping. Oh, before we go through some of the normal housekeeping, actually, I've got some non-normal housekeeping for you. That's normal. That's our SMS workshop program for 2021, and I'm sure that we'll add more dates to the end of that because you've all been requesting different subjects and things like that to cover in SMS workshops. So don't expect that the show's going to end in November. However, there is some other HOPS news that I want to share with you before we move on to the normal workshop, and that's if you haven't seen the HOPS Winter Workshop Roadshow, which we used to do before COVID came along. They got cut a bit short in the winter 2019 to 2020, and we didn't do them at all in 2020 to 2021. But they're back now, and they will be happening in January, February and March this winter. There's 6 locations on the roadshow. They're open to all organisations, whether you're currently a very keen HOPS user or you've never used HOPS before at all and you just want to learn more about it. It is necessary to book, so please get in touch with us if you'd like to attend, because spaces are limited, and we will discuss and demonstrate the things that you tell us you want to have demonstrated. So it'll be different at each one, and it'll be based on what will be useful to you based on your current deployment of HOPS, ranging from the nothing at all to the amazing. So you can find out more information about that both on Facebook, and if you go to hops.org.uk/roadshow, you'll find that picture and more information. And just to prove that we did do it in previous years, there's a photo of a HOPS workshop taking place at a previous winter. Some of you may recognise yourselves in there. I'd also like to point out that New HOPS is now well and truly in operation. If you haven't already started using New HOPS, then you'll see there's a banner at the top of Old HOPS that invites you to try out New HOPS, www.hops.org.uk. And one of the good things, many good things about New HOPS, but one of the good things is if you have more than one HOPS account, you can now link them together so that you only have to remember one username and password. If you click on the little person symbol in the top right-hand corner and go to My HOPS account, and then you'll see where the red arrow is pointing to, you can link another account so that you only have to have one username and password. And finally, in the HOPS news for this week, if you haven't already seen it, the HOPS newsletter, Top of the HOPS, came out about a week and a half ago now. Contains useful information for both those involved in the administration of HOPS and general articles of interest for those involved in the management of railways and other guided transport systems. One of the things in Top of the HOPS this month was the launch of the Spot Report system for near-miss hazard and safety reporting, along with all the resources and videos and posters and cards and things that we produced in connection with that. So if you haven't already seen it, have a look at Top of the HOPS and you will find out more. Right, okay, I think that's all of the marketing for the beginning of this workshop. Before we go into part 3 of track safety, and if you remember, part 1 was the sort of brainstorm session, part 2 was the PTS briefing, part 3 now is going to be the SMS document. I made a mention of authorised walking routes in one of the previous videos and suggested that they should be shown on a map, and then there was some interesting comments about what a map should look like and all those sorts of things. Somebody pointed out a map that I had drawn from a railway that I used to work at, and several people said, let's have a look at that map. So I have cleared it with that railway that a suitably redacted version can be shared, and when I upload all this stuff to do with track safety into the templates for advanced HOPS members to access, I'll upload the redacted version there, but I thought we'd have a look at it. I've done my slides in the wrong order. Okay, we will have a look at it after I've done the normal intro to a workshop. Do apologise. So sorry if you've heard this before, but I'll go through it as quickly as I can. Rules of the workshop. Number 1, please join in. It's of much more value to everybody else if you join in and throw comments and rotten fruit and things like that as we go through. Do share this video with others, pass it on to others in your organisation. It'll be on Facebook as soon as it's finished, and it will get uploaded to YouTube within a week or so. The aim of the SMS workshop program is to construct a series of best practice SMS templates, which will hopefully save us all a bit of time, save us all a bit of cost, and enable us all to demonstrate that we're taking part in the best practice from many other railways. We're all required to have an SMS. There's a lot of overlap between our organisations in what that has to contain, and at the moment, I fear, we are all coming up with that separately and duplicating all that time and effort. Things that we're not saying, we are definitely not saying that this is what you must do. We're just saying this is one example which we feel is a best practice that we've collected from various different railways that we've been involved in, either by ourselves or directly with HOPS. We're also not saying that this is guaranteed to be suitable for every undertaking, and as with all safety aspects, it's your responsibility to make sure that what you implement and what you choose to take out of the workshop or out of the templates, which you're welcome to use in any way you like, is suitable for your undertaking and mitigates the risks that you have. Too far. A couple of assumptions that we've made for these track safety briefings. First is that the maximum line speed is 25 miles an hour, and secondly that most heritage railways are single line except in station areas. I know that there are heritage railways that can in certain circumstances run at more than 25 miles an hour, and some that have lengthy sections of double track, but they are the exception, and 95 plus or probably more than that % of heritage railways are single lines except in stations and 25 miles an hour max. So that's what I've based this on, and if that doesn't apply to your railway, then you will need to think extra hard about extra mitigations for the extra risks that you have from being a double line or from running at faster than 25 miles an hour. Okay, sorry if you're sick of hearing all that, because you've heard it many times before. Here are the track diagrams that I drew that you asked to see. I just drew them in PowerPoint, which I know is not a CAD design package, but it certainly makes it easy to edit, easy to pass on, and easy for other people to pick up. So there's a bit of introduction here. Obviously you can see it was from the South Devon Railway, where I used to be in the operations department. Different sections of the map. So first of all, the schematic map. There's the key. This is all just little circles and squares in PowerPoint. The colours have gone a bit funny on this when I've pasted it into the presentation. HV clothing exempt areas were shown in yellow and restricted work areas were shown in red. So a bit of introduction there before it moves into the actual drawings. There you can see the track in a broad black line and an outline representing signals and things like that. You can see the grey line around the top of the map with AWR next to it. That's how I showed an authorised walking route. You were asking how authorised walking routes could be shown on maps. That's the way that I did it. And we also mentioned about access points, authorised access points being shown on maps, so that staff who need to access the line are only using the authorised access points and not just climbing over fences or gates or trespassing on the line on adjacent landowners' land. So you can see there, I can't quite remember the key if I'm honest. Let's go back a bit to the key. I think we'll find that green is vehicle access points and yellow is pedestrian ones. Let's go back. Oh dear, too far, sorry. Yes, so vehicle access point in green, pedestrian access point in yellow. Obviously you can do whatever colours you like and just update your key. So there's an example of a bit of track, and it goes on. You can see more access gates, signals, bridges, mileposts where telephones are. There's a sewer pipeline under the forefoot. Much like an SMS, of course, of which this is part, you'll find that you'll draw one and you'll get 80% of it, and then next year you'll review it, or people will give you feedback and comments of things that you've missed or things that you've got wrong, and you'll perfect it, and after 2 or 3 iterations of perfecting it, you'll come out with something that you're quite proud of. So whatever official names that you give to your bridges and tunnels and structures and user work crossings and things like that, put in the map, and then everybody knows officially what they're called and what they're referring to. And I remember now when we had our PTS briefing last or 2 weeks ago, we said about reporting an emergency at the curve next to the tree by the pond, and that's not good enough because you can guarantee that the person that you're speaking to will be thinking of a different tree by a pond by a curve in the line. It's got to be some sort of official place name, mileage, structure, station, that sort of thing. Little embankment and cutting symbols on the left-hand side there, similar to the OS map, and then a red background where work is restricted, and obviously somewhere in a proper publication it will say what the restriction is and who's allowed to do what. More sidings and stations and things. I'm just leafing through. Again, my platform area there, it was originally in orange, and I don't know why it's come up in grey in this presentation when I copy and pasted it in, but there we go. So anyway, I'll just whiz through to the end of the schematic map. Oh, where access gates are difficult, a little copy and paste of the OS map. You can get a license to use copy and paste sections of the OS map for various different purposes, and that's what you'll need to do if you want to put one in your safety maps. And I'm pretty sure that, I can't remember now, it was a number of years ago when I did it, but the license that we got didn't cost us anything because of the purpose that we were using it for, which was obviously these maps. Okay, we've got to the end of the line of the schematic map, part 2, ordnance survey maps, key driving routes, and you may very well know that your key driving routes to get to access gates around your line are to go on this road or that road, and you've been doing it for years. But for new people coming in, who I'm sure you want to attract new people coming in, and for people who want to develop who are already in, they might not already be so familiar. And having this all laid out and sort of pre-planned helps a lot in your ability to demonstrate that you're giving those people the skills they need to do their job, rather than just relying on the fact that they've been here for ages. Also an OS equivalent of where all the structures are, and again I came up with some sort of colour coordination system there by the looks of it, of green for stations and yellow for bridges over the railway and blue for bridges under the railway by the looks of it. I can't fully remember if I'm honest. Okay, there's all the structures going along and where they actually are on the OS map, which is obviously to scale rather than the schematic map in part 1 that was not to scale. I'll just whiz to the end of the line. Intentionally blank, just so that it appears on the, when I printed these as booklets, and so we had intentionally blank to make sure that a new section started on the right page. Signalling maps, very similar, but specifically the signalling drawing layouts. I did have the signals and the signal numbers on the schematic plan, but we put in the booklet just the specific signalling layouts as well. Hopefully we'll move on a bit. There's another signal box. And you can copy and paste in from other drawings or publications if you've already got this stuff drawn out just into a booklet, so that you've got a nice booklet of track maps, so that you've got something official, so that it's part of the SMS. This is the one and only official map of what number each signal is, where the authorised access gates are, and all that sort of stuff. Standage measurements, any useful information like this you can put in. Obviously I went out with the trundle wheel and measured how long everything was, and that station is on quite a tight curve, so it was necessary to measure it on the inside or the outside, but any useful information that you can put in. And that is where I would end it in terms of the map that you circulate to all the signalmen and drivers and people who work on the line and things like that. But for your duty managers and for senior staff, you can have further parts that are redacted from the general version that show things like who the line-side landowners are, and obviously I've heavily redacted this, but I just coloured in the adjacent fields to the railway line. Again, I just did it all in PowerPoint using the little polygon tools in PowerPoint. There was nothing very clever or technical about it. Gave them all a letter and then identified the name and phone number of who owned each piece of land adjacent to the railway line, so that if there's any issue with a dangerous tree or a incomplete fence or an animal on the line or something like that, we can immediately contact the appropriate landowner. So obviously there was more pages of that, but I redacted it. And then a section on points of access, and this is the line broken up in terms of where the nearest access should be used in an emergency. So between those red border lines, any emergency that we need to attend, down the bottom where it says redacted was descriptions of which access point should be used, what the method of protection would be, who the controlling signalman was, that sort of thing. And that's the end. So that was those maps that I mentioned in the workshop and that you said you wanted to see. I'll make sure that they're uploaded with the other documentation when we upload it in connection with the best practice template in the workshop. And you can put it apart however you like. If you'd like me to draw a map for you, I'm sure that we can work out some sort of deal for that. Because I must admit, I do quite like drawing maps, and I don't think I'm that bad at it. Right, okay, so let's move on to part 3 of the SMS workshops on track safety. Hopefully, I'll be able to change my screen over to the Word document. If you remember, we have a template Word document for each of the SMSs that we go through, and that's what's shared. Oh, good, it's come up now finally for me. So, as always, a cover sheet that you will delete before you make use of this, if you choose to make use of it as a whole document rather than just cutting the paragraphs out, just to make sure that if anybody finds it in your office or on HOPS, that they don't mistakenly think that it is the SMS that they're supposed to be working to, a great big banner saying this is not your organisation's SMS. Details of how I recommend that you control changes and copyright and usage and how you're allowed to use it. Then into the actual SMS, nice place for you to put your logo, write your company name. If you haven't been here before, then where there's text in red is where you're expected to change it to your own company name. Of course, you can change any part of this that you like, or just use parts of it, or chop it around, or do whatever. But the things that are written in red are things that I've definitely specifically intended that you will change. Okay, so here we go then, and a lot of this should be familiar given that you sat through my PTS briefing last session and the brainstorm the session before that, and fed a lot into it as well. And thank you very much, I should say, to all the comments and feedback that come in after the workshops that enable us to shape this before we upload it as a best practice template. Right, as you're getting to know by now, I always like to start SMS documents with a little description of why we're here and what risks we're trying to mitigate and what legislation we're trying to comply with. So first of all, we acknowledge that there are risks associated working on the railway track and that this policy details how those risks will be reduced as far as reasonably possible. My favourite saying, because remember, there's no rule or law that says you can never ever have any risk. It's just that you must identify what the risk is, reduce it as far as reasonably possible. The principal legislation covering occupational health and safety at work, as we know by now, is the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations. There will also be some relevance in track safety to the provision and use of work equipment regulations, because some of that does interact with our ability to be safe on the track, such as if it's particularly noisy or particularly heavy. The principal risks associated with walking or working on the railway track are a person being injured due to a slip or trip, a person being injured or being ill due to an environmental or existing condition and not being in an easy position to obtain help. That is definitely a risk to being on the track, because not all track is next to an access gate or a station or a telephone or any of those sorts of things. And the third bullet point, and probably the one that we are naturally most concerned with, is a person being injured by a moving train. Just to confirm, this policy is not concerned with the personal security of the person, which is covered by the lone working policy, which we did several workshops ago, or the confidence of the person in doing their job when there are no other staff from which to seek advice, which will be covered in the competence management system and policies, which will, of course, identify when somebody is being trained to do something as part of a team, separately from when somebody is being asked to do something completely on their own with no ability to ask for help or no immediate supervision to ask for help. Right, as we said right at the start, Track Safety 101 is that if we can remove the risk, then we should. And that is pretty much the first step of any risk management process, that if we can remove the risk, then no one can come to any harm by it, and therefore that is what we should do. So the overarching principle will be that risks to persons arising from being on the track will be reduced by minimizing access to the track. Where a person completes their task by other means than being on the track, there will be no track-related risk arising. Goes without saying, doesn't it? However, it is really worth saying because, as we discussed in previous weeks, it is something that's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that just because we're a preserved railway, it's fun to go on the track. Whereas really, exactly the same rules and laws exist as do on the main line, and there should be no sort of a letdown in our desire to reduce risk just because, in inverted commas, we're a heritage railway. Just because we work on a heritage railway does not mean we're working for ourselves. We still work for an employer, which is the railway, even though we might be volunteers, and therefore the rules and approach that should apply should be exactly the same as that being at work, not that being at home. It is acknowledged that not all tasks can be done without accessing the track, and in some cases, for those tasks that can, the alternative might introduce more risk, and therefore being on the track is the least risky option. Every role on the railway that requires access to the track will be specifically noted in this policy, and only staff carrying out those roles may access the track. So we're going to start from a position of no one's allowed on the track unless we specifically say they are. Rather than saying these people are not allowed on the track, we will make sure that we've specifically authorised the roles or tasks or persons that are going to go on the track so that we know 100% of the circumstances where that's occurring, rather than trying to catch up with all the circumstances where it might be and we don't want it to be. So, very similar to in our not quite very similar, we're not quite there yet. We will look at all those roles in a second, getting ahead of myself. But first of all, we'll just remind ourselves of some of these definitions. Which again we've looked at probably in both of the previous sessions, but we'll just go through them again. On or near the line, everything up to 10 feet or 3 metres from the running rail. On the line side, everything outside that up to the boundary fence. The 4 foot, the area between the rails on one track. The 6 foot, the area between the tracks. And the cess, the drainage area off the side of the ballast shoulder. I went through that extremely quickly because this is not the workshop in which I'm trying to teach you those things. Hopefully you've seen the previous workshops and you already fully understand all those. So there's the definitions. Again, I don't need to go through them. Except to say that there are some exceptions, as we mentioned in previous weeks. You're not on or near the line if you're on a public level crossing which is open to the public and not carrying out work. And you're not on the line side if you're on a public level crossing in the same way, or there is a fixed wall or fence or structure between the person and the track and the person is not visible to approaching drivers. If you're inside a building, you're not on the line side, or if you're on a platform not within 4 feet or 1.25 metres of the platform edge and not carrying out any work. All of those are exceptions that mean you're not on the line side. What else have we said in here? One more definition, a position of safety, which, as we said in previous weeks, was 4 feet or 1.25 metres from the nearest running rail. These definitions will also be in the rulebook. Whatever SMS number your rulebook has, you can put it in there, but it's important to remember that not every single member of staff is going to refer to every single SMS policy before they do the task. There are some SMS policies that we would expect them to refer to, like the rule book is one, that's part of the SMS. But this track safety document is really the company's overall approach to track safety rather than instructions to an individual person. This track safety policy shapes how the rulebook, for example, and policies and general instructions will develop within the bounds that this track safety policy has set up. And you'll probably see that more apparently when we get to the bit talking about protection systems, where I've been very careful to construct the SMS to dictate how the protection system must work rather than how it must be implemented. Okay, is that the end of definitions? Yes, here it is. So we're back on staff again. The following staff carry out work which requires them to access the railway line, which is on or near the line or on the line side. No other staff may access the railway track except with the permission of the duty officer or in an emergency. So again, if you remember, we are allowed to make the rules here. If you're writing the SMS, you're making the rules, and as long as you're prepared to live and die by them, then that's absolutely fine. So we won't want to tie ourselves up in knots by saying no other staff may go on the railway. Full stop. We want to say no other staff will go on the railway except with the permission of the duty officer or in an emergency, so that we give ourselves the flexibility to do what we as managers know is safe, and that we're prepared to stand up for and to defend. If we didn't have that little clause in there, then we would never be able to use that clause, and therefore any time that we did it, we would be breaking our own SMS, which obviously we don't want to do. So we've given ourselves not a get out, but the appropriate level of flexibility to say, in addition to what's written in this policy, blah-de-blah may go on the line, or this particular rule may go on the line, may go on the line. PTS is not required in an emergency for the purpose of saving life or preventing injury or accident. However, staff's general railway induction includes details of how to protect the line in an emergency, which must be followed in these cases. So even for staff who don't need to go on the line, who don't have a full PTS, their induction that every member of staff who comes to work on the railway should get first day before they start actively volunteering must include a bit about how to protect the line in an emergency, or how to stop trains by putting two hands up in the air. So, here's the staff that are allowed to go onto the line. Footplate staff who work on engines when operating trains, so clearly need to be on or near the line to operate and attend to their engines. There is no alternative to being on the line in order to access and attend to the train. All staff on locomotive footplates are exempt from the requirement to wear high-vis clothing when on the footplate. Footplate staff of a competence level of cleaner or above are exempt from the requirement to wear high-vis clothing when on the ground attending to their own engine. Those below the level of cleaner must wear HV, as they are considered not sufficiently experienced in trackside behaviour to be exempt. Clearly, you will tweak all this for what your appetite for risk is. As we said at the start, this is just one way to approach it. Signalmen require access to the line for the purpose of accessing signal boxes, communicating with other operational staff, carrying out token duties, and attending to signalling faults. There are sometimes alternatives to this, e.g. telephone, but it is not always possible, and face-to-face communication is often required in order to be effective. There is no, and as usual we'll correct the spelling mistakes as we go along, there is no alternative to being on or near the line when carrying out token duties. Where possible, a podium with a solid barrier around it will be provided in the appropriate position for token duties. Signalmen are exempt from the requirement to wear HV clothing when carrying out token duties where this is authorised at the locations below. So you see here we're going to specifically authorise where it's allowed rather than trying to chase around where it isn't. It's only exempt where we specifically say. This will only be authorised where there is a consistent place for signalmen to stand when, oh my goodness me, you can tell I've gone over this many times as all your comments and different versions of this have been coming in. A consistent place for signalmen to stand when giving or receiving the token that is clearly visible to the train crew. Okay? All happy with that? Good. Right. It didn't take too very much long, but a comment about what three words has come up in the thing. I'm not a fan of what three words, I have to say. It's a proprietary system that relies on a company to tell you, to enable you to create and to decipher the three words. I don't think it's a good idea to be using in long-term documents of a safety critical nature. But I know lots of people disagree, and it's up to you how you manage safety on your own railway. Guards required to access the line to prepare and operate their trains. There is no alternative to being on the line in order to access and attend to the train. Guards are required to wear HV clothing when on or near the line, but not when inside the train. So you can start to see here we're explicitly stating which roles people are going to do that mean we're happy for them to go onto the line, because we're justifying here in the SMS whether there's an alternative and whether it's good enough and where we expect them to use the alternative or where there's no alternative. Duty officers are required to access the line in order to communicate with other staff, attend to incidents or irregularities around the site, and to maintain good awareness of the sites. Alternatives, i.e. telephones, will be used where appropriate, but it is not always possible. Running shed staff are required to access the line to carry out work on engines and vehicles, including attending failures on the running line. There is no alternative to this if they are working on a vehicle which is necessarily on the rails or a train which is disabled on the running line. A clearly marked area in the running shed may be exempt from the requirement for HV clothing, but not the requirement for PTS competence. In mitigation, all movements in the running shed are made on site by the driver looking ahead to confirm the line is clear and being prepared to stop short if it isn't. The area is, And there you will write in the description of the area. And ideally, it will be something like as far as this telegraph pole or to the end of the covered area or to as far as the sign that says HV clothing required on this point. It will be ideal if it is explicitly marked as to where the distinction between where you require high-vis clothing outside the running shed and where you don't require high-vis clothing inside the running shed, where that boundary is. Workshop staff are generally not required to go onto the line, but may be required to work on components on vehicles in sidings. They may also be required to attend a failure on the running line. There is no alternative to this if a train is disabled on the running line. Areas of the workshop where there is no railway are exempt from the requirements of HV clothing and PTS training. Areas of the workshop where there is railway line may be exempt from the requirement for HV clothing, but not the requirement for PTS competence. In mitigation, all movements in the running shed, same as above, are made on site by the driver looking to head to confirm the line is clear and being prepared to stop short if it isn't. And again, a description of the area where high-vis clothing isn't required. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. Several places here we've said where HV clothing is exempt. We've always been careful to specify what the mitigation is. And we need to make sure that if we're going to allow that exemption, that we are prepared to monitor that the mitigating measures are actually being observed. And if we're not, then we shouldn't be prepared to bear that risk, and we should just say whatever the original mitigation is, so in this case high-vis clothing, still applies. I've said in several places that PTS competence is still required, even though HV clothing isn't, and I stand by that. Because otherwise, how will somebody know the precautions that they're supposed to be taking? How will somebody know how close they're supposed to stand to the line or what to do when a train comes towards them? HV clothing is there as a backup, as a last resort, just in case the protection system doesn't alert you to the fact that there's a train coming, which might be a lookout, for example. But HV clothing is just there as a backup, that if that system fails, the driver sees the HV clothing, whistles the horn or whistle, the person on the track hears and moves out the way. It's never the primary means of maintaining safety on the railway line. In the running shed and the workshop, we can fairly satisfactorily demonstrate, even in general terms here, and obviously you'll write something more specific, that we can mitigate that risk in other ways and therefore do away with the inconvenience of high-vis clothing. S&T and P-way staff required to access the line in order to maintain their relevant equipment. There is no alternative to this, as the equipment requires to be positioned on the track. Equipment will be positioned on the line side rather than on or near the line whenever possible when equipment is installed or renewed, or where a reasonable opportunity exists to move it. So if you're renewing a loc and you can put it on the line side instead of on or near the line, you should take that reasonable opportunity to remove that risk. I'm not saying it will always be possible, but if it is a reasonable opportunity to do it, and it is a possible thing to do, then we should be doing it. Station staff, such as porters and dispatchers and station masters, are generally not permitted to access the line. PTS is not required to retrieve an object from the line using handheld grabbers, but PTS is required to retrieve an object from the line by means of a person getting down onto the line. PTS is not required in an emergency for the purpose of saving life or preventing injury or accident. However, staff's training for their role on the platform includes details of how to protect the line in an emergency, which must be followed in these cases. And if you remember, we had a little bit of a discussion a couple of weeks ago that said if a person, for example, falls down in the gap between the train and the platform, the number one priority is not to pull them out, but the number one priority is to make sure that the train is not going to move. Obviously, every circumstance is different, and if you can pull them out in 1 second, then maybe we'll do that first. But if they're actually down sort of amongst all the brake gear and everything, then putting a second person in a position of danger in order to try and rescue them is not the appropriate course of action. Making sure the train is not going to move is the appropriate course of action, and that's what needs to be in the station staff training. Other station or infrastructure maintenance staff, where maintenance is required to be carried out on equipment that is on the line side or on or near the line, it will be necessary for staff to go into these areas. The work and the necessity to go onto the line will be agreed by the department manager in advance. So I'm sure most railways have, and in quite a lot of places they're called station groups, that do an excellent job painting the station and doing all that stuff. Sometimes their work goes a little bit off the radar, perhaps, but certainly, for the sake of today's discussion, if it's going to require them to go on or near the line or on the line side, which of course we remember that if they're within 1.25 metres of the platform edge, then that is on or near the line or on the line side, then the department manager needs to be the one to sign off and say, this is either safe or it isn't safe, and this is the protection system that you're going to use. Conservation staff required to access the line as part of their work on boundaries and the line side corridor. There is no alternative to this. Audit and management grade, staff carrying out audits, management visits, safety tours, etc. may access the line where necessary to complete the task. Where an alternative exists, it will be used instead. Contractors and visitors may also access the line under the following circumstances, either for long-term work, such as if they're there for 2 weeks, doing scaffolding or whatever, they will hold the normal PTS competence. But for one-off work, they are either under the direct supervision of a PI-COW and briefed accordingly, and the work and method is agreed in advance by the department manager, or a suitable method of work and protection system is agreed when no trains will approach on any line at the site of work. A person is nominated in charge and briefed on their safety responsibilities and how to summon assistance, and the whole work gang is briefed on the limits of safe work. So that last bullet point is designed, for example, in the winter when we know, in inverted commas, even though we can never know, we know in inverted commas that no trains are running. We've got a contractor in for 2 weeks. It's appropriate to brief them, tell them where their extent of work is, identify the person who's in charge, make sure they understand their safety responsibilities and how to summon assistance, and let them get on with it. No railway should try and go down the road of saying that contractor staff or visitor staff are the responsibility of the contractor or the visitor. And as we saw in the report for the DMU vehicle that ran away about 6 months ago off a lorry and crashed into a level crossing gate, it is very clear that there is a responsibility on the client, which is us, the railway, if we get a contractor in for health and safety. And I'm certainly not an expert on CDM 2015, but I'm pretty sure that we'll find that CDM 2015 will define where the client is responsible for safety. But certainly, please look into that before you absolve yourself of your safety responsibilities, and don't think that just because they're contractors, they're somebody else's problem, because that is almost definitely never the case. And finally, we obviously require a little bit of a loophole here in order to train people. So staff undergoing PTS training may access the line without a PTS competence under the direct supervision of the PTS instructor. As part of an organised PTS class, a suitable protection system must be in place. That's the only time you can go on the track as part of PTS training, is in your PTS class with your PTS instructor. You must do that before you start your training as a fireman or as a guard or whatever of those other things. We can't really go down the road of saying they learn their PTS skills as they're learning to be a fireman or be a guard, because if they expose themselves to some risk on the first day and become injured as a result of it, we will find it very difficult to justify. And as we know, PTS is not massively onerous to teach and assess. And if somebody can't get the hang of a PTS training day and an assessment, you're probably wasting your time trying to train them as a fireman or a driver. So we'll train them in PTS and we'll require them to pass out for that before they go on to training for other things that require PTS. Some other staff, on-train buffet and TTI staff are not permitted access to the line in normal operation. However, as they spend the majority of their work time on trains in motion, they are required to be trained in track safety awareness, I've called it, and I've used small letters so that it doesn't imply that it's a defined term, but they will be trained in awareness of track safety, even if not full PTS, in order to be safe and effective in an emergency arising on a train, such as evacuating the train. That can just be part of their normal training as a TTI or a buffet staff. That's no problem. Right, a little bit about training and competence, and hopefully this sounds very familiar to what you heard 2 weeks ago when we went through the PTS briefing, because that's what I built that off, this is what I built that off. PTS training will be delivered to all staff identified as conducting tasks that require them to go on the line. Unless in an emergency, staff must have a current PTS competence as shown on HOPS, because, of course, remember, the only one true source of information about whether somebody's competent or not, hopefully, is whether it shows them green in HOPS or not. Anything else is hearsay and you won't be able to defend. You have one competence management system, and that is the final answer as to whether somebody's competent or not. Must have current PTS competence to access the line. An onus exists on each member of staff to personally ensure that this is the case before accessing the line. PTS training will comprise a theory and a practical element of training. The theory element will cover as a minimum the following headings. Way PTS is required. Why PTS is required. The definitions of on or near the line, on the line side, the cess, the 4 foot, the 6 foot, where a position of safety is, a bit about high visibility clothing and footwear, walking and working on the line, slips and trips, authorised walking routes, things that we must not do, use or wear that may affect them seeing or hearing an approaching train, what to do when a train approaches, what to do if caught with no position of safety, protection systems, limited clearances, no refuges, tunnels, obviously if you have them, if you don't, delete, observing something wrong with a train, observing something wrong with the infrastructure, animals on the line, stopping a train or protecting the line in an emergency, and alcohol and drugs. And I come back to something I said earlier when I was talking about the relationship between this SMS document and the rulebook, for example. I'll say the same here with regards to the relationship between this SMS documents and the SMS training briefing, is that the SMS will define the limits, it will define what it must have included and what the expectations are. And it's the job of the PTS training briefing, or whatever it is, to fall within that. That's not to say it can't be better or go about it a different way, but the SMS document is defining what it must include. I've got a comment to say that this signal is coming in and out. So I apologise for that if that's the case. Oh, only one comment though, so it may only be just one person, but I apologise if it's affecting numerous different people. I'll struggle on as best I can, as I always do. The practical element will include taking the class onto the track. That's all it says. It will include taking the class onto the track, because otherwise it's very difficult for a person to take it all in the classroom. A lot of people learn a lot better by doing, by seeing, by being out there, by being taken out to the platform and being asked to point out where the 4 foot is and where the cess is and where a position of safety is and where's an example of something you can see around you that isn't where a position of safety is, what are the particular risks that you might think about if you were walking over there, all those sorts of things. It helps settle it into the brain more than just seeing it on a PowerPoint presentation. Staff competence in PTS will be recorded in HOPS, and all the roles identified above will require it. In the interlocking between roles and competence elements in HOPS, if a role requires PTS, you will make it require the element in HOPS. Staff must complete PTS training before they start training in any of the roles that require PTS, as we said earlier. Staff who arrive at the railway with a PTS competence from another railway or on the main line may bypass the training, but not the assessment, as detailed in the competence management system, and as I'm pretty sure we had a fairly detailed discussion about when we talked about the competence management system. Always, you can use your judgment on a case-by-case basis to bypass some or all of the training, but in my opinion, never the assessment. And if anyone turns up from another railway and says, well, I've had PTS on the main line for the last 50 years, I'm not doing your PTS assessment, which will take, 20 minutes tops, then is their heart really in the right place to be supporting your railway and your safety management and your approach to doing it right, if they can't even bring themselves to do the PTS assessment? I could understand if you said, you must do a year's worth of training before you're allowed on the track, and then you can do the assessment. But we're not saying that. We're saying, yep, we understand and we recognise and we can justify and provide a rationale for your past experience, but you've still got to do the assessment. Right, okay, moving on. So, high-vis clothing. High-vis orange high-visibility clothing is required to be worn, except where shown for specific roles above. The high-vis clothing must be clean, and if working in anything other than clear visibility, must have the reflective stripes. Clothing must be done up at the front at all times. I know that people don't like to do their clothing up at the front, but I'm sorry, if you don't have it done up at the front and it tucks under your arms, then your visible surface from the front is much, much reduced. And again, it will be difficult for us as companies to defend somebody only having 2 tiny little bits of orange around their shoulders and under their arms rather than a whole front torso of high visibility orange. The minimum high visibility clothing required on authorised walking routes is a mini vest. The minimum high visibility clothing required elsewhere on or near the line or on the line side is a full HV vest. And during foul weather, high visibility trousers must also be worn. When walking or working on the line, the member of staff should consciously choose the least worst place to walk. And try and avoid saying you must work in the 4 foot, or you must walk in the cess, or you must walk in the 6 foot, or any of those things, because it's very difficult to generalize that. And there will be many, many factors that lead to which is the least worst place to walk. So encourage, if we can, staff to make a conscious decision by looking at all the options and saying, I'm going to walk there because I've considered the others and determined that that's the least worst place to walk. And I always say to people, always expect that I'm going to come up behind you, tap you on the shoulder and ask you to justify why you're walking there rather than over there. And I expect you to have already thought about it and have the answer ready to go. Because otherwise, we just walk where we always walk, or we walk because that's where the person in front walked, and we unconsciously put ourselves into a position of danger. A protection system must be in place at all times. That could be anything from a possession to a lookout to a blockage to whatever it's going to be. And the method of implementing the protection systems will be detailed in this SMS, will be in the rulebook, which you will put your rulebook SMS number in there. The policy for when a train approaches, the protection system must be robust in ensuring that all staff working on the track will be in a position of safety 10 seconds before a train passes. And that sentence is really important because we're giving these staff the protection system, and it's up to us to make sure that we can justify that the system that we give them allows them to be in a position of safety for 10 seconds before a train passes. Because if they're not, and if they get injured by the train, it will be us who set the protection systems that have to justify why that person was working there and our system wasn't up to scratch. So in every possible circumstance, we need to be able to justify what is the protection system for that person. How can we guarantee they're going to be in a position of safety 10 seconds before a train passes? The protection system must not rely on staff hearing the train's whistle or horn alone. This may only be included as a backup mitigation. PTS rules and training must make the following arrangements very clear. To ensure the backup remains effective, the whistle backup that is, whenever a train driver sees staff on the line ahead, they must give a loud prominent blast on the whistle or horn. The staff working must acknowledge this by raising one arm above the head. The driver must acknowledge this by giving a short, sharp acknowledgement on the whistle or horn. If the staff do not move out of the way or do not acknowledge the whistle or warning horn, or the driver believes there is any other danger, they will brake the train accordingly to stop or attempt to stop well clear. And a series of short, sharp blasts on the whistle or horn will be given as an emergency warning that a train is approaching. And staff must stay in their position of safety until the train has passed or until their protection system allows. And these bullet points will be reflected in all the rules and training related to working on the line or on the footplate. Again, the SMS sets the high-level requirements, and all those other documents like rules and training and things like that show how they're going to be implemented. Okay, we're doing well here. Do feel free to ask any comments if you want to. If you've got any questions or you want to make any comments about what's going on, please feel free to do so in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And I promise I won't say that I don't agree with everything. Sorry. Like I did about 3 words. Slips and trips. PTS training must emphasise that the slip and trip risk and assist staff in identifying assets that may cause a hazard, such as point rodding and signal wires. That's another thing that is good to do in the practical. See how many things we can see around us that could constitute a slip or trip hazard. And steel toe caps will be worn at all times when on or near the line or on the line side. Right, protection systems. If you cast your mind back to 4 weeks ago when we talked about protection systems, all work that is on or near the line requires a protection system. It requires some sort of agreed official system that is how we're not going to be susceptible to those risks that we identified at the beginning of the workshop. The protection system is the method by which the safety of staff is assured against the risk arising from an approaching train, as well as protecting trackside staff from approaching trains. The protection system must be appropriate for the risk introduced to trains by the work. The protection system must be robust in ensuring that all staff working on the track will be in a position of safety 10 seconds before a train passes. The protection system must not rely on staff hearing the train's whistle or horn alone. This may only be used as a backup. Protection systems on running lines will generally be in the categories below. And I'll just show you, because you may remember that flow chart from a few weeks ago. Work either affects or doesn't affect the safety of the line, and it will either have trains in it or it won't. So the 4 permutations of that are work affecting the safety of the line with trains being used, which we often call a possession, work affecting the safety of the line not using trains, work not affecting the safety of the line where trains are not still running, and work not affecting the safety of the line where trains are still running. And protection systems on sidings will generally be the category, or in the categories below: protection of a siding and work on vehicles in sidings. And there's the flow chart of how we got to each of those 4 options for protection systems on running lines. In all cases, the method of implementing a possession, and that should say protection system, let me correct that now, whoops, protection system, is in the rulebook. That is how it will be implemented. When you say things like the signalman will agree this, the PICOP will phone that, you must put a board out here, that's in the rulebook. The SMS is going to define the overall, the rulebook is going to define how it's going to be implemented. The process must ensure that those controlling movements towards the possession are able to clearly understand the protection arrangements, and written records must be kept. So we're talking about signalmen or controllers, depending on what the setup is on your railway. They must clearly be able to understand what they're protecting and keep a written record of it. So you might have a possession form or something like that. Reminder appliances are provided in signal boxes to enable signalmen to apply to levers or switches as an additional reminder of the protection required. However, this must not be the sole protection, and an additional protection not reliant on the human signalman is required only for work that's going to affect the safety of the line. I've got that paragraph slightly in the wrong place. Where work's going to affect the safety of the line and we're protecting trains from the work as well as the work from the trains, an additional protection will be required. And in fact, I suspect that paragraph is supposed to be here. Working connection, so this is the first of the protection methods: work affecting the safety of the line where trains are in use, which we might call a possession. Trains in connection with the work are permitted to operate in a possession, and where staff are also working on the line not in connection with the train, a safe method of working is required. Because, of course, it's all very well saying we've got a possession, but if trains in connection with the work are going to be buzzing around in the possession, then those staff aren't actually protected from them. The safe method of work could be that the staff travel to and from the site on the train, and the train only moves when all the staff are on board. That would be a suitable method of safe working. Or that staff are specially arranged to stand clear by the PICOP or other person before a movement passes. There's lots of ways to arrange it, but there still has to be some way, to come back to what I said earlier, for us as managers to be able to justify how we expect those staff to be in a position of safety 10 seconds before an engineering machine or a tamper or whatever passes them. Rules require that moves made in a possession are made at a speed and with a degree of caution such that they can stop short of any obstruction or person on the line. All movements must be authorised by the PICOP. And I'm making quite a lot of assumptions here by saying rules will require this and this will be stated here. And as we said right at the start, clearly you need to establish that all this agrees with what happens on your railway, or adjust it so that it does agree before you can put it into use, or just pick out the bits that do agree and put those into use and not the others. A possession alone cannot be relied on to protect staff where there are train movements taking place without further consideration, e.g. lookouts or other verbal arrangement. However, the verbal arrangement is reliant on human behaviour, e.g. the PICOP remembering. Staff working in this protection system should remain alert, because if the only thing protecting you is another human being, there is a susceptibility to making a mistake, of course. A possession requires a degree of additional protection. This may be that the PICOP takes possession of the staff or token for the single line section concerned, and or that stopboards are placed at the limits to the possession such that no movement can reach the possession without passing a board. Again, the method by which you implement it will be determined in your local rulebook. The protection system must be arranged by the PICOP, and a PICOP may take part in the work. The person carrying out the role of PICOP must have a current PICOP competence as recorded in HOPS in accordance with the competence management system. Work affecting the line not using trains, so now we're talking about trolleys and things like that, there is considerably less risk to staff working in the protection system and the normal trains operating outside it. A form of additional protection will still be required to avoid human error resulting in a passenger train entering the protection system, e.g. a token or disconnection. The protection system must still make adequate provision for protecting staff working against trolleys, etc., taking part in the work. So there is still a risk, of course, that somebody could get run over by a trolley. The protection system must, The protection system must be set up by the PICOW, who must have a current PICOW competence. Obviously, you might call the role something different, recorded in HOPS in accordance with the competence management system. The only difference in my thinking in terms of a heritage railway context between a pie cow and a pie cop is that a pie cow can set up a possession and allow other pie cows to work in the possession, whereas a pie cow only looks after their own gang. If you're familiar with the modern mainline terminology, then a pie cow might be equivalent to a COS. I have not introduced an equivalent to the engineering supervisor role because I don't think it's that required in a heritage railway context. Work not affecting the safety of the line where trains are not still running. You might think of this as a line blockage, again, if you're used to the mainline terminology. In this protection system, no trains or trolleys will be used, and staff working in the protection system can work in reasonable confidence that no train will approach. However, this protection system does not require any additional protection, so is reliant on human behaviour, e.g. signalmen. Staff working in this protection system should remain alert. For the same reason that a human can make a mistake, nothing is guaranteed. The protection system must be set up by a pie cow. He must have a current pie cow competence as recorded in HOPS. Work not affecting the safety of the line where trains are still running. Well, if trains are still running, it's a jolly good job that it's not affecting the safety of the line. When normal trains are still running through the site of work, there is a high risk to staff working. Unless other protection systems, such as TOWS, Train Operated Warning System, for example, are available, a lookout must be appointed. The method of doing this is stated in the rulebook. The lookout may not take part in any work. The lookout must have a current lookout competence as recorded in HOPS, and the protection system must be set up by a pie cow who must have a current pie cow competence recorded in HOPS. The lookout requires the following sighting available to give adequate warning time. The onus is on the pie cow and the lookout to ensure this. Now, after we went through this 4 weeks ago, there was very interesting subsequent discussions in the feedback, which I always encourage you to take part in and email me or whatever it is after the event. Just because the workshop has ended doesn't mean the workshop has ended, about very small numbers of people working out on the track. And insofar as what I'd said, and insofar as what I'd said now, if two people want to walk down the track, one of them would have to be the lookout and not take part in the work. And that's not necessarily always reasonably practicable in the context of a heritage railway. It also might mean that if you need two people to do the work, then you end up with a third person, and sometimes the third person to be the lookout can cause more of a distraction than the benefit they bring. So I've highlighted this piece in yellow because it's not a sort of perfected piece. It's something that's gone in, which I think, if we're honest, needs a little bit more discussion, a little bit more risk assessment. Where a person is working alone or with a maximum of one other person, they may act as their own lookouts in addition to the work they are doing. So we've sort of broken our earlier rule that the lookout may not take part in the work, but here we are, we write the rules, we write the SMS, and we write the rationale. Provided that the work taking place does not affect their ability to see or hear an approaching train. Both staff are competent as lookouts, because part of the mitigation here is if they're both taking part in the work but they're both looking out, we've mitigated one with the other. That it would require both members of staff to miss the approaching train in order for an incident to take place. And by having two people looking out, and of course if they're going to be looking out, they have to be competent to look out, hopefully we've mitigated that back down to an acceptable level. And there are no other environmental conditions that may affect the staff's ability to see or hear an approaching train. If there are two staff and one is not competent as a lookout, the above may not be applied, because otherwise the one who is competent as a lookout is the only person looking out, and we can't apply our mitigation. Any more than two staff require a lookout. And that's because any more than two staff, they do start to become a distraction to each other. If there's only two, they can only be talking to each other, whereas if there's a third one person can be a distraction while the other two are doing the work. Three or more starts to get out of the realms of what can realistically be mitigated. Again, very interested to hear your points of view, very interested to hear your comments. Do let me know. Right, protection of a siding. When work takes place in a siding not on a vehicle, the siding may be closed by one of the following methods: clipping up points or placing a stop board at the limits of the siding. This reduces the risk that a movement will enter the siding whilst the work is taking place. The protection system must be set up by a pie cow. You must have a current pie cow competence and recorded in HOPS. And work on vehicles. But just to be clear, this does not apply to footplate crew working on their own engine, which we've already established they can do. They don't need the high-vis and that sort of thing. When the train on which work is taking place provides adequate protection, i.e. there is no risk from adjacent lines, etc., the staff may be protected by the placement of a not-to-be-moved board on the rolling stock concerned. Where staff will be working underneath the vehicle, they must also assure themselves that handbrakes are applied or the vehicles are scotched. Permission must not be given for any other movement to enter the siding while the protection system is in place unless all the staff are moved clear and briefed accordingly by the PIC. The protection system must be set up by a PIC who must have a current PIC for working on vehicles competence as recorded in HOPS. You might decide that that just requires a PICAL, but the reason I've specified PIC and made it a separate competence is so that carriage and wagon staff, for example, can have it without having to have the full PICAL competence and knowing how to set up lookouts and things like that. Okay, there's our protection systems. We mentioned a couple of times about additional protection, such as tokens, so here's a thing that clarifies that. Where reference is made to additional protection, the following are acceptable. On single lines worked by a staff or token, the PICOP or PICAL obtaining the token or staff. A disconnection of points or signals by the technician. Placement of a stop board in the forefoot of the line concerned with a red flashing light during times of darkness or poor visibility, or other local lockout or key protection system authorised locally at, and if you've got that, that's where you'll write in the details. So they're the things that we've considered are acceptable as additional protection, something additional from just the human remembering or following a proper process. We've talked about limited clearance and no refuges several times before. Where a structure exists close to the line in front of which there is no position of safety, a limited clearance red and white sign is provided. Each individual sign is recorded in the asset management system with an annual maintenance task of checking that the sign is still clean and clear and the indication has not rubbed off or faded. PTS training includes a section on how to treat limited clearances. Clearly, if we're putting this sign up in order to tell people that there's limited clearance, it becomes part of the safety equipment, and therefore we should have some sort of system in place for maintaining it. And the same with no refuges, where a tunnel or viaduct, bridge, parapet exists and there are no refuges where it might be mistakenly believed there are, and no refuges blue and white sign is provided. And again, the asset management system will make sure that once a year you go around and check that they're all still in place and that the colours haven't rubbed off or faded in the sunlight. Tunnels we talked about. Tunnels exist at the following locations where, due to sighting or curvature, it is not possible to assure oneself before entering that it will be possible to make it through the tunnel and be in a position of safety at the other side for 10 seconds before the train arrives. Staff are not permitted to enter these tunnels without a protection system that assures them no train will approach. So you will write in here in red the details of the tunnels to which that applies. Tunnels exist at the following locations where the sighting and curvature is such that it is possible to ensure oneself before entering the tunnel that it will be possible to make it through the tunnel and be in a position of safety at the other side for 10 seconds before the train arrives. Staff are permitted to enter these tunnels under a protection system that does not assure them that no train will approach, e.g. lookout. So you might have one or the other or both or neither. You can add or amend or delete as much as you like. Not to be moved boards, where reference is made to not to be moved boards, a mitigation is required to ensure that when more than one group is working, the board is not mistakenly removed when a group is still working. The following procedure will apply as detailed in the instructions for these tasks and or the rulebook. So you get one of these options really, either that one or that one. So the first one is each group will place their own not to be moved board marked with their name and department. So if there's 3 not to be moved board on the same train, that's absolutely fine. They'll be marked with their name or department in order that they know which one is theirs and they take off the right one when they're finished. Or, alternatively, not to be moved boards will have tags applied marked with the name or department of the group working. When a group arrives to work and applies a not to be moved board, they will apply their tag. If a second group arrives, they will apply their tag to the existing board. When either of the groups comes to leave, they will remove their tag and identify that another tag is in place, so not remove the not to be moved board, even if it was them who placed it there. And when the other group comes to leave, they will remove their tag and identify that there are not any more tags in place and the board may be removed. Okay, so one or the other options of those. Getting very close to the end now, we're doing very well, but I guess I could say we've actually taken 3 sessions to do this, so we should be getting to the end of it sometime near soon. Interfaces, oh dearie me, it's so much easier to see spelling mistakes when I'm reading it out to you. Interfaces with other duty holders. Interfaces with other duty holders exist at the locations below. So if you have a connection with the Network Rail system or another heritage railway or a tram system or anything like that, we need some arrangements for how we manage that interface with other duty holders. And we need that on a much wider range of issues than just personal track safety, for sure. But we're talking about personal track safety now. The company's track safety rules and policies apply up to the boundary stated. Staff working beyond the boundary must comply with the instructions in the working over book. The working over book is the historical name for staff who are based in one district or region working onto another district or region. You might well call it something else on your railway, and you will change the name of working over book to whatever the document is that you provide that details what staff must do when they go over that boundary and are on another duty holder's territory. And that's the end. You'll be pleased to know I've got to the end of the PTS SMS document. It's only taken 3 workshops to get here. So we're actually going to have quite an early finish tonight, you'll be pleased to know. But now's your last chance to raise any comments or queries if you want to, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you very much to everybody who has sent in their PTS documents in order to help me prepare for this workshop. And do feel free to continue to do that, because I think this is one of the workshops where we really have got down into the weeds, whereas our other SMS workshops have been much higher level. And I'm really pleased that you've encouraged me and given me positive feedback enough to get this far, and that we're making some real headway into developing some really detailed SMS documents. So if you're an advanced HOPS railway, you will have access to the Word document templates and the PowerPoint template for that map that I showed you earlier, and you are free to use them in whatever way you wish. If you're not an advanced HOPS member, then I'm afraid you cannot, but I'm more than happy to talk to you about what's involved in becoming an advanced HOPS customer. The next SMS workshop is not on Tuesday the 31st of August. That is a mistake where I copy and pasted this presentation from a previous workshop. The next SMS workshop, I think, is on the 28th of September, and I wonder if this will go all the way round. Yes, it will, and we'll see what that's going to be. 28th of September, SMS structure and document control. So again, not too heavy a SMS workshop to go through, but nonetheless an important one. And we have talked quite a bit about structure of numbers and things like that, but we'll have a little SMS structure and document control. And what I might do, depending on how much meat I manage to find to put on the bones in that one, is I might put change control in with that one as well, and put one of the other many topics that you've been asking me to cover in instead on Tuesday the 9th of November. So if you have a particular topic that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to let me know, either in the comments or by email. But apart from that, I think that's where we're going to end today. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I hope it's been useful, and I'll see you all again on a future SMS workshop. Good night.